Welcome back to the show. My final guest this morning is John Murphy of John A. Sinnott & Co. Solicitors in Enniscorthy. John, I'd like to discuss a range of topics with you this morning, including property, probate, insurance claims and commercial litigation. But before we do, I'd like to start by asking you a little bit about your own background.
Well, I came to Enniscorthy, where my main base is, just over 30 years ago. I grew up in Galway, son of a Cork man and Roscommon woman, who met when they were both young medics in England, like a lot of Irish people many years ago.
So where did you start your career then as a solicitor?
In Ayr Square in Galway with the firm of Geraghty and Company, run by four brothers, the four Geraghty brothers, three of whom I think are still there and practising to this day. And then I came down to Enniscorthy with the intention, I have to say, of spending 2 years there. And I always recall one of my first social meetings with my then boss, the late Des McAvoy, who, funny enough, himself was a Galway man who had come down to Enniscorthy to spend a short time. And then his principal, his employer, died rather unexpectedly. And as we walked up the road, he looked at me and he said, "What are your intentions?" And I thought for one moment of saying something like honourable, but I decided it was a bit early to be glick. And I said I thought I might give it 2 years. And as we walked in the door of what was then the Rafter Inn, now run by Bobby Rackard, he looked at me and he said, 2 years. He said, suppose we give it 3 months first. How's that? He said, if you don't like me, you can go. And if I don't like you, you'll be gone. Is that okay? What are you having? That was my introduction to the boss.
Very good. Now, John A. Sinnott & Company was set up in 1865. It must be one of the longest established solicitors' firms in the county.
Yes, I think we might even be slightly ahead of our colleagues O'Connors here in Wexford. And I haven't been able to find out an awful lot about John A. Sinnott himself here for today's programme. That's something I must do. But I have something very interesting here in relation to the history of the practice. I found in the office an old bound volume of the carbon copies of letters that were sent out from the office. And interestingly, even though the letters are on all different cases, they were all bound in the same book. That will give you an idea of the volume then compared to the volume now. And this is the successor to John Sinnott. He was a man called John Scallon. And on the 10th of May 1916, he's writing to his uncle in Dublin, who was also a lawyer. And he was having a problem because a number of his clients had been commandeers. There were commandeering notes which he said were served on various clients of his, grocers and publicans and things like that, by armed members of the Republic, making them hand over goods to the value of up to £150 at the time, which was a lot of money. And he wondered how he might recover that money for his clients. And on the second page of the letter, he says, I'll just quote you from the letter, it says, the rebellion or insurrection was sprung on us very suddenly here, as all was peace and quiet on Wednesday, and at 4 a.m. on Thursday, the rebels were being posted in their several places around the town. Now that the police barracks is situated next door to us, I need not tell you that my position in the Abbey Square was not what one might call pleasant, as bullets were flying up and down from the top of Castle Hill. That's in one of the old books in the office. I find it a fascinating insight into what was happening in Enniscorthy in 1916.
So in 1992, you took over the ownership of John A. Sinnott and Company Solicitors. How did that come about?
I was in partnership there with the late Mr. McAvoy and another person at that time, and then we kind of soldiered on for a few years together after his death, and then parted company. So I became the principal of John A. Sinnott and Company and continued on with the name in the practice where we practice from now in Market Square in Enniscorthy.
And what have been the main areas of focus within your own business over the last 20 years?
Client servicing has been, I think, a very main focus. I mean, everybody's probably familiar with what solicitors in provincial towns do, so I won't bore you with that. But we have put a very, very heavy emphasis on client service and trying to give the client what the client needs and what the client wants. And as far back as 1996, for instance, you'll be familiar with the ISO 9000 quality standard. While the client mightn't see that every day, what it's about is accepting that even in legal work, there is a process of doing a job. I mean, if you buy a house for somebody today and you buy a house for somebody else tomorrow, they're different houses, they're different people, they may have different requirements, but 80% of the transaction should be the same. And therefore, there's no reason why we can't put an intelligent process on it and have a quick reporting time to our clients and show them what's happening and letting them see what really happens. Now, I do accept, of course, that your client, what does the client want when he's buying a house, when he or she is buying a house? I asked this question in the office many years ago, and I got all the answers you'd expect, and all very good answers. Service, polite service, quality of service, not too big a bill. And I said, there's something else. What is the something else? And eventually they said, what? What is it? And I said, it's the keys. The client wants the keys of the house. It's very simple, really. And all the process in between is really kind of our business. If you want to know more about it, we'd be delighted to talk to you about it. But we accept that you might be like a lot of people. And what you really want is, could I have the keys, please? And as soon as possible. And that's what we try and do for you.
And just on the topic of property, there's been huge changes over the last number of years in relation to the sale of property, with NAM probably being the biggest seller of property across the country. What impact has that had on firms like yourselves?
There have been massive changes. Some firms who would have had a lot of developers on their books, and this would apply to provincial towns as well as anywhere else, would have been devastated. That business just fell away completely. In our own case, that's not something that we followed all that much, developers, although we had some smaller builders with us, most of whom thankfully survived. So we've had a mixed bag of business. And it's interesting that we've had a steady run of business even throughout the recession. And the only way I can explain it is that it's always somebody's time to come to the market. Whether you're buying high or buying low, there are thankfully young people who are employed and still becoming employed. And it's their time to buy a house.
Yeah, solicitors have a great insight into how the property market is doing. Like from your experience, are the first-time buyers coming back into the market at this stage, and are investors back at the races?
Investors most certainly are back at the races. More perhaps in Dublin and maybe Cork to a lesser extent. But certainly there are funds, you're aware of funds like Apollo and these funds who have bought up a lot of property at what they obviously see as a bit of a snip in Dublin. And you'll get this if you read the history of any recession. Some people are derogatory, maybe call them bottom fishers, but these guys are very astute financial managers. And when you see them buying property, you can pretty well call it that that's the bottom of the market. And they seem to be the indications. I'm not an economist, and I hope it's not all a false dawn, but it certainly does seem to be picking up. Although a lot of people would say at the moment we have a two-tier economy, we have a Dublin economy and the rest of the country. Interestingly, I was talking to a colleague in Cork, your own county, recently, and he felt that Cork is on the cusp of a pickup as well, just a bit behind Dublin. And so you'd hope that that will feed on throughout the country in the next year or so.
Another area I want to speak to you about is probate and the entire area of wills. I was reading something there recently and it said that 50% of people end up dying without ever writing a will. Is that your experience?
Yes, that is still the case. Yeah, it's extraordinary the number of people that don't take the simple step of making a will. And really it is a very simple step. It's such an important document, and it really can be done so reasonably with your local solicitor. For the life of me, I don't understand why people don't just go in and do it. I suppose we're all busy. We've all other things to do. It's not a priority. So what happens if it's not a priority? You put it on the long finger and maybe sometimes you forget about it altogether. If you have property, it can cause a lot of hardship, particularly if you have children. It can cause a lot of upset if you don't go and do the simple step. I can remember many years ago a very unfortunate case where anybody passing the road in this particular farm would have said to you, Mikey is the farmer in that house. Mikey was in his mid-50s. The father was in his 80s. And the father died, still was the owner of the place, didn't make a will, and there were 3 other children in that family, all in their 50s, one of them in their 60s, I think. They had all left Ireland many years before, but each one of those 3 who had been away for so long, their entitlement arose at the date of the father's death, so they were actually entitled to a quarter of this farm, even though Mikey, as I described him, had been running this place for 25 years. Very unfortunate.
I know that another area that your firm has lots of experience in is insurance claims. There seems to be a mood out there today, and certainly lots being said around insurance companies trying to find every way they possibly can not to pay insurance claims today across all sectors of the economy. Is that your experience?
Well, first of all, I'd like to think that in highly regulated companies like insurance companies, that you don't have whimsical behaviour that decides whether to pay a claim or not to pay a claim. But all I can tell you is, in my own experience as a legal practitioner, I have had more arbitrations against insurance companies since this recession began than I have ever seen before. Now, you tell me, is that coincidental, or is it because somebody somewhere gave a signal and said, block every claim every possible way you can? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm just posing the question. Arbitration is what a policyholder must do. If you have, for instance, a fire in your house and you go to the insurance company and for whatever reason they're not going to pay, you might think, why, can you not just sue your insurance company for breaking the insurance contract? The answer is no, because if you read usually page 56 or 65 of your policy, you'll find that if there is a dispute, you have to go to arbitration. Now, it's not the end of the world. It's not hugely more complex than going to court, but it's just not a court. It means you've got to choose an arbitrator and go that way and push your claim and get loss assessors and loss adjusters involved and all that type of thing.
Yeah, but of course, it's a very stressful situation for somebody to find themselves in, and in addition to that, it delays the payment of the claim.
Well, it's a horrific situation to find yourself in, because your roof is burnt, you're trying to get back into your property. The one place, you've just said to your wife or to your husband, thanks be to God we're insured, and then you find you're getting resistance from your own insurance company because of some clause on page 52 that you never really knew anything about. And it's a very, very distressing time. And what I would say to anybody is that there's one thing that I've found over the years. The nice person who comes to see you after the fire, who seems to be looking after you very well, that person is a loss adjuster. That person is not working for you. That person is working for the insurance company. And sometimes you need to be very careful, and you need to arm yourself early with a different person called a loss assessor. The assessor is your man. The adjuster is the insurance company's man. Now, that little piece of information could be very valuable to anybody who's involved in a serious insurance claim. To get yourself covered with a loss assessor. That's
certainly very sound advice, John. Another area that I want to focus on during this morning's interview is the commercial litigation sector. Usually in times of recession, commercial litigation goes through the roof. Is that what has happened this time round?
Yes. You'll find that when recession hits, everybody starts looking at the dollars more carefully. Disputes can arise between partners where they were flying along and everybody was doing well, or nobody was bothering to check how well they were doing, perhaps, and all living on borrowed money. And then when the scrutiny comes on the figures, one looks at the other and says, he's not working as hard as I am, or I'm doing more than him, or I'm really the soul of this business, or whatever. That causes disputes. As recently as last week, I was talking to somebody who has been in partnership with another for a long time. It's not in County Wexford, so I can, people needn't be trying to figure out who it is. And it was interesting that as I got through this with this man, a quiet man, very nice man, it was a question more of recognition than anything else. There was a feeling that one of the two wasn't being recognised, that one was kind of the boss and the other wasn't, whereas they in fact were 50-50 partners. And when we talked through that, and when we actually went through the financials as to what was owed to the bank, as to what was coming in, as to how the business was doing, all I can tell you is that this man was very relieved after the discussion. And he began to see that the picture wasn't exactly as he thought it. He was looking at it from a very personal perspective, and he began to see that things were actually not too bad. And in that way, I think it's very important to keep people away from litigation. It's a very costly exercise. It's also a very uncertain exercise. We seem to think that all judges have the wisdom of Solomon. They don't. That's why we have courts of appeal.
Just on that, what advice would you give to business people to protect themselves against that, issue around that legal aspect where they have to even consider going down the legal route?
I think first of all, anybody setting up in business needs to talk the legals through before they set up in business. For instance, you must know hundreds of businessmen who set up a business. They have a share each in a company. Is there a shareholders agreement? Absolutely not. What happens if one of them dies? Does he have to? Does the other man now have to deal with the widow or the partner of his co-shareholder? None of these things are thought through. What might happen in the unfortunate event of somebody's death? Is there a break-up mechanism? Is there a buyout mechanism? How do these things work if the thing goes wrong? The day to discuss that really is before you get into business. Now, I know when people are busy and getting into business, it doesn't happen. I think it should happen. You need somebody good on the finance side. We've lots of good accountants. We've lots of good solicitors. Half the time they're not asked for any advice.
Now, another area there that has made headlines recently is the entire area of mediation, because the legislation is changing there shortly, which will bring about a requirement on solicitors to advise their clients that mediation could possibly be an option. What type of an effect do you think that that's going to have on the legal profession?
I hope it'll have a very good effect on the legal profession. We're already used to, in the commercial court, which deals with cases over €1 million, where there's an insistence on mediation. You must be seen to have taken part in mediation. For lower amounts, I think far too often the thing heads the way of the court before it is fully explored from a mediation point of view. Now, there was an old-fashioned mediation long before the word mediation was used. There was a thing called a joint consultation, where two solicitors could get together with their clients, perhaps in different rooms, and walk from one to the other over the course of an hour or two and say, look, my fellow will go a little bit more, if your fellow will take a little bit less, and you would kind of broker a deal over an hour or two. And now sometimes I think we're completely preoccupied as practitioners with either court or with the formal method of mediation where you must employ a mediator. There is a simpler step even than mediation that could be taken first. Then yes, I think if that doesn't work, going to an actual mediator is a very good idea. It saves the client money. And I think any practitioner, his job should be to get the client out of the dispute area and out of litigation as quickly as possible. I see that as our job.
Well, John, many thanks for dropping by this morning and for providing our listeners with great advice. Continued success to you and your firm, John.